Hey, Realty One Group agents, Tim is back. On this recording, I'm going to record pages 9, 10, and 11, okay? This is a legally binding contract. All parties are advised to seek independent legal and tax advice to review the terms of this agreement. This form has been approved by the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors. No representation is made as to the legal validity or adequacy of any provision in any specific transaction. A real estate broker is the person qualified to advise on real estate transactions. If you desire legal or tax advice, consult the appropriate professional. Okay, paragraph 29. Very seldom, if ever, will you put something here. In my 17 years, I've never added an addendum to the RPA when I send it to the listing agent. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's very, very uncommon. Now, paragraph 30 is very common. This specific warning we want you to put in here. And what I have there now is what we want you to put in there, okay? Upon buyer providing seller with notice of objections and or request for repairs, buyer's due diligence period shall be extended by the same number of calendar days that it takes the seller to respond in writing to the buyer's objections and or request of repairs. Paragraph 2, property be vacated, empty, and left in broom-swept condition prior to the walkthrough. Okay, so the last paragraph is easy. You guys know what this means. Okay, but what the heck does this mean? Okay, this is really important. Read it 3 or 4 times, and then it'll click. Basically, what this is saying is that your buyer's going to do an inspection. There's a good chance they're going to ask the seller to fix some stuff, okay? If you only have a window of time of, say, 10 days to do that due diligence, okay, you want to make sure the seller responds to your written request for the repairs. Some sellers don't. Some sellers will just sit on that and wait until day 10 rolls around, and then buyer and seller panic what's going to happen. By putting this in your RPA, this will protect your buyer so much you'll have no idea until you become a full-time realtor and you understand the importance of this clause, okay? Don't be surprised if you send this over with an offer. A good listing agent might counter this paragraph out. Not many do. If you work for us and this comes to you in an offer on your listing, I would tell you to counter this out. This is not to the seller's benefit. This is to the buyer's benefit, and you represent the buyer, okay? So that's the additional terms. Again, at the bottom of the page, each party acknowledges that he or she has read, understood, and agrees to each of the provisions on this page unless a particular paragraph is otherwise modified by addendum or counteroffer. Buyer's name, property address, the initials. Okay, page 10, buyer's acknowledgement of offer. All of this information, gang, confirmation of representation. The buyer is represented in this transaction by who? In this case, you're filling this out. You're putting in Mark Otero. You're putting in Realty One Group. You're putting in your name. You're putting in your license number. This is easy stuff to fill out, okay? So this part, lines 5 through 9 are easy. Line 11, buyer licensee, that means you, of interest. Pursuant to NRS 645-.252, paragraph 1, line C, a real estate licensee must disclose if he or she is a principal in a transaction or has an interest in the principal of the transaction. Licensee declares that he or she does not have interest in the transaction or does have interest in the transaction, direct or indirect, in this transaction as a principal or a family member. So basically, if you're representing yourself, you're going to put does, that you do have interest in this because you're representing yourself. If you're representing a family member, you have to, right here, family member, your mom, your dad, your cousin, your uncle, you have to click that. If your buyer is no relation to you whatsoever, you click off this box on line 13, okay? We'll cover this more in individual classes, but this is really important, that if you're representing your brother and you don't check off this on line 14, that's a violation, and that's a big fine by the real estate division, okay? So make sure, if it is a family member, you then have to put in here, my brother, my cousin, my mother. My family member is my mother, my sister, whoever it might be. You get the idea, okay? Line 18, the seller must respond by, we have to put in a time. Let's put 5 p.m. Today, today's June 30th, okay? So we're going to put that we want a response. Once my mouse cooperates here, gang, I'm sorry, it's not cooperating here. We want a response. Here's June 30th today. We want a response by tomorrow at 5 p.m. 24 hours. If you put more than that, You're giving the seller more time to get more offers, okay? And less time for your buyer's offer to be considered, okay? But check with your manager, check with your team leader to make sure that that strategy is what they want you to do, okay? Alrighty. The seller must respond within those dates and times unless this agreement is accepted, rejected, or countered below delivered to the buyer's broker before the above date and time. This offer shall lapse and be of no further force or effect. Following the date of acceptance, buyer agrees to be bound by each provision of this agreement and all signed addenda, disclosures, and attachments. So again, if you give them 24 hours, it takes them 2 or 3 days to respond, and they say yes, you'll have to create an addendum extending the seller response time. This is where you type in your buyer's name. This is where you put in the date and time that you're typing in your buyer's name, okay? And then this is where they will sign when you send it to them, okay? All right, gang, last page. The seller's response. Now, you might say, Tim, I'm not the seller. I represent the buyer. Correct. But you're still filling in this information. It's in MLS. It tells you who the listing agent is. It tells you who the broker is. It tells you the company name and the broker's license number. Put all of this in here, okay? Line 12, licensee disclosure of interest. Pursuant to NRS 645-252-1C, the real estate licensee must disclose if he or she is the principal of this transaction. Now, this is the same that we filled out on page 10 with you as the buyer's agent. This is the same thing for the seller, this area right in here. The seller licensee, not the buyer licensee, okay? So this gets filled out by the seller because this is the seller's response, okay? Line 18 is FIRPTA. FIRPTA is the Foreign Investment Real Estate Practices Tax Act. That's a mouthful, okay? This has to do with the seller, not you as the buyer's agent. But this is where the buyer has to check this off if they were not born in the United States. If applicable as designated in the seller's response herein, seller agrees to complete, sign, and deliver to the buyer's FIRPTA designee a certificate, spit it out, Tim, indicating whether the seller is a foreign person or a non-resident alien pursuant to the FIRPTA Act. A foreign person is a non-resident alien individual, a foreign corporation, not treated as a domestic corporation, or a foreign partnership, trust, or estate. A resident alien is not considered a foreign person under FIRPTA. Additional information determining status may be found under irs.gov. Buyer and seller understand that if seller is a foreign person, then the buyer must withhold tax in the amount determined by the buyer's FIRPTA designee, unless an exception applies. Seller agrees to sign and deliver to the buyer's FIRPTA designee the necessary documents to be provided by the buyer's FIRPTA designee to determine if withholding is required. See page 26 of USC section 145. Basically, this is where this will kick in for you as the buyer's agent, that if the seller neglects to check off FIRPTA and is found out to be a foreign person, and this gets past the escrow company, okay, your buyer is going to be responsible for paying that tax. Okay, very, very important. We do a lot of classes on FIRPTA. The escrow officer will educate you on FIRPTA, but if you're representing the buyer, this is checked off by the seller. And if it is checked off, as escrow moves forward, make sure that your buyer is not liable for any tax consequence whatsoever. Okay? Line 28, the seller declares that he or she is or is not a foreign person, therefore subjecting this transaction to FIRPTA withholding. The seller must check the appropriate box and put their initials. Okay? So FIRPTA is very important. Now, when the seller gets your offer, the seller has 3 choices. Accept it, counter it, or reject it. Only one of these are going to be checked off. If they accept it, seller acknowledges that and accepts and agrees to be bound by each provision of this agreement, all addenda, disclosures. That means they accepted the offer as you sent it. Very uncommon. What's typically going to happen is this. Counteroffer. Seller accepts the terms of the agreement of the RPA subject to the counteroffer number 1. They want to change the price. They're countering the close of escrow date. They're countering the number of days for the mortgage, for the loan contingency, or the appraisal contingency. That's where a counteroffer would be checked off. Or third option is rejection. They just didn't like your offer. They thought it was insulting. They thought it was too low. There was something about it they didn't like, and they're saying thanks but no thanks. Okay, then the agent will print in the seller's name, and the seller will sign it, and then they will get this back to you along with, let's say, a counteroffer, or just the RPA if it's accepted, or they'll send you this form with this checked off for rejection, okay? And then again, at the bottom of each page, each party acknowledges that he or she has read, understood, and agrees Each and every provision of this page, unless a particular paragraph is otherwise modified by addendum or counteroffer. Buyer's name, property address, buyer's initials, seller's initials. All right, gang, that is the 11-page RPA that is in our transaction desk, which is part of Matrix, effective October 2024. Okay? Know it, love it, learn it. Do me a favor and practice typing this up for yourself as if you're buying a property. That's the only way you're going to get good at this, is don't practice on your buyer. Practice on yourself many times before you run into your first buyer. I'm wishing you nothing but the best, and I'm always here in the Summerlin office if you need anything.